So when we look at institutional power, so the institutions in the United States, we have criminal justice, housing, education, food, employment, and healthcare. And within every one of those institutions, there are racial inequities. And so these are just the policies and practices of the particular institutions that routinely produce inequitable outcomes for people of color and advantages for white people. And so then we have this structural power, and the structural power is the interaction of the institutions across society that result in the cumulative and compounding effects of an array of societal factors that systematically privilege white people and disadvantaged people of color. So all of these structural powers is basically all of the institutions work like interacting and working over time to create all of these societal factors that disadvantage people of color. And so when we're looking at unpacking structural power, it's influenced by our history, right? And I'll show a timeline here in a few minutes that really outlines what structural power looks like in the United States. And it's just like the history provides the foundation of that structural power, and it's grounded in white supremacy. And then we have the culture, which is it just exists all around us. And it provides the normalization and the perpetuation of racism. And so when we also have another slide in the work that some of the trainings that we do is that we've been swimming in white supremacy culture so long that we don't see it unless we choose to. Well, white people don't see it unless they choose to. And then we have these values, valuing whiteness as the norm, that the white experience is the experience within society. And then we have, again, the interconnected institutions and their policies that provide the legitimacy and reinforcements to maintain and perpetuate racism within the various systems. So when we're looking at the accumulation of unfair practices in early childhood, so in 1938, there was this Fair Labor Standards Act, which again created this second-class treatment of the domestic workers, including childcare. So when we look at the history of who were the domestic workers and continue to be the workforce in childcare, they're women of color. And so, of course, we were going to have an act in 1938 that provided second-class treatment to domestic workers because of the grounding of racism. And then when we look at substandard pay, particularly in childcare, Black women on average make $12.98 an hour, and Latino women make $10.61 per hour. That is not a livable wage, anywhere close to a livable wage. And then in the mid-1800s, we had these parent-led programs which were designed by white parents to educate and enrich their children. But then we had the free programs for low-income children that were meant to teach moral habits. So again, we have this difference between white education of young children and free programs for low-income children, particularly Black children, that were meant to teach moral habits. And then in the 1900s, we had states that were creating mother pensions, but Black mothers were excluded. And then in 1996, we had the reauthorization of the Child Care and Development and Block Grant, which included key requirements that disadvantaged Black people and Latino families because they have work requirements, hour requirements, certain types of work. So it really, disadvantages Black and other people, and Black and other families of color. So what we have is we have these systems of oppression, right? And they're grounded in our history. They intentionally disadvantage groups of people based on their identity while advantaging members of the dominant group. They are manifested in economic, social, political, and cultural structures. And if we're going to effectively end the oppression, we have to understand the factors which maintain the systems so that we can, and how we can upend some of the things that uphold the power structures. So what we have within these power structures is that we have the individual people, right? These are the individual people that are in positions of power, and they have beliefs and actions that serve to perpetuate oppression. These can be both conscious and unconscious, right? A lot of times people are not aware of things that they have absorbed that influence their beliefs and actions, and they can be both externalized and internalized. So we have these individuals in positions of power that have these beliefs and actions. Then they interact with other people, both within and across difference, that then influences the institutional and structural power and policies and practices. So when we think of power, it operates within a perspective, worldview, or paradigm. And what we have in the United States is this paradigm, this worldview that is influencing the systems of oppression and upholding the systems of oppression as white supremacy. So that often is a trigger word in the United States, but it shouldn't be, because in order to challenge systems of power, we have to deconstruct what actually white supremacy is, right? So when you hear the word white supremacy, what thoughts, feelings, words come to mind? You can just put it in the chat. Hate, thank you, Jennifer. Ongoing systemic racism, okay. What else? Dominance. What else? Unsubstantiated control, force of power. Great, thank you, Terry. Anything else? Controlling, yes. Supreme power, dominance of whiteness. Okay. Great, thank you. Racism at its roots. Yes, Antonio, thank you. All right, so when we're thinking about, and actually that slide might be in here, I can't remember. I was looking over the slides this morning and I can't, slip my mind, but okay. So when we're talking about white supremacy, a lot of times people equate it with the KKK or white nationalists, but actually white supremacy is just an ideology. It's a framework that assigns value and morality and goodness and humanity to the white group, while casting people and communities of color as criminal, inhuman, and undeserving. And so when we look at the roots of white supremacy in our society, it was designed, its roots are in mass genocide, in slavery, yes, the belief that white people are better than other people, the people of other races, yes. So it's a culture, right? There it is. There it is. There's the slide that I was talking about. So it's just the standards that are seen as mainstream and dominant, and they have evolved from the United States' history of white supremacy. So again, we've been swimming in white supremacy culture for so long that it's become invisible. It's in the, it influences so much, but once you start understanding white supremacy and seeing it, you're going to see it everywhere, right? And so this is the timeline of white supremacy that I was talking about. And so when you look at this, I want you to take a look at it for a minute and really think about what stands out to you. Any thoughts, but thinking about what stands out to you and just looking at the time. So if you could just put it in the chat, that would be great. Yes, Julie, the end of slavery was not the end of white supremacy in the United States. Absolutely. What else? The creation right after slavery is an increase in the dominant powers. Yes. Thank you, Jeanette. What else, you guys? Any questions about this timeline? I think like one of the things that when I look at this timeline, I'm always struck by is like the length of time when you take it, and I know this stops in 2016, but obviously nothing has changed since the end of this, is that how much of our history is taken up by slavery and Jim Crow segregation, right? Okay, I'll talk about convict leasing and debt peonage. Thank you, Julie, for putting that in the chat. So it's just, we often hear people say, well, it's so in the past, or why are we still talking about this? Well, slavery and Jim Crow segregation take up the majority of our history, right? So there are two things I'm going to talk about. One is Reconstruction, and then I'll talk about felony convict leasing and debt peonage. So with Reconstruction, there's a reason why there's no black bar in there. So if you guys know, in this, we're not really taught about Reconstruction or the accurate history of Reconstruction when we're in school. So with Reconstruction, after the end of the Civil War, the troops, the Union troops stayed in the South. the Deep South, right, to help ensure that the post-slavery amendments were implemented properly, right? So the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments to the Constitution. So what happened is that after the end of slavery, Black men got the right to vote, right? Black women didn't really get the right to vote officially until 1965 with the passing of the the Voting Rights Act. So what happened is that you had in these Deep South legislatures, the majority of these Deep South legislatures were made up of Black men. And so what they were doing is they were advocating for universal public education. They were advocating for things that were going to promote equality within our society. Well, as you could imagine, the former plantation owners were not super happy with what was happening in the Deep South. So with the election of 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes, so the parties were flipped then, right? So he was a Republican, and so which would be a Democrat in today's society. What happened with the election of 1877 is that Rutherford B. Hayes won, but the plantation owners in the Deep South, they said that the election was stolen. Sound familiar? So just repeating of the playbook, right? And so what happened is that the nation, and we're talking about, it's because it doesn't really happen yet. So, we're talking about 12 years post-slavery, and the entire nation was fatigued. They were like, why are we keep talking about slavery? I'm tired of talking about slavery. So what happened is that Rutherford B. Hayes made a compromise and said, if you don't challenge my election, I will withdraw the federal troops from the South, which is what happened. And as soon as the federal troops were withdrawn from the South, that ushered in Jim Crow segregation, white terrorism, and the KKK. All of those things came into place. So when we're looking at Reconstruction, that's the closest we've come to a functioning democracy in our society is during Reconstruction. So I'll talk about convict leasing and debt peonage real fast, and then we'll move on. So convict leasing and debt peonage, if you've ever heard of the Black Codes or anything like that, were created after the Civil War. And so what happened is like Black people, particularly Black men and boys, could be arrested for walking on the wrong side of the street or making eye contact with a white person. It was very, very subjective. And so what happened is that they were not allowed to own land, which they had no money because they were beholden to, sharecroppers and they were sharecroppers and they were beholden to those farmers. Yes, this is where it came from, Jeanette. So what happened is that they would be arrested and given a fine, right? Well, they had no money to pay for it. So what happened is they had to work off their crime. So we're talking about getting arrested for walking on the wrong side of the street, and they would have to work for 5 years without pay to pay off their fine that they had received. So these were called the Black Codes. And so this turned into this convict leasing and debt peonage, which then fed into, mass incarceration in the United States. So this was like the beginning of mass incarceration in the United States. Does that make sense? Yes, thank you. All right, great, Julie. All right, now I'm going to move on. We got to talk about early child. All right, so what are some pressing issues in early childhood, y'all? Pay for childcare workers. Amen, Julie. What else? Affordability for families. Yes. Bias, cultural, racial, and gender biases. Yes. Ableism. Yes, Julie, you see this as a mom of a 1-year-old. Yes. Yes, it's the foundation of education, but not valued as a profession. Yes. Bilingual staff, not enough centers, so access 100% childcare deserts, right? Every county in North Carolina is a childcare desert. We do not have enough childcare. And I'm just going to say this straight up, you guys, so that you understand what is happening in our state. The state of North Carolina has a $9 billion surplus. $9 billion. So it's not that we don't have the money, right? All right. So just thinking about why might those in power want to keep wages low for childcare workers? Why might they want to limit access to high quality early childhood educations? Why might they want to defund public education? Because that's happening in our state right now with the Leandro case, that the state legislature has been ordered by a judge to fully fund public education, but they refuse to do it. Again, $9 billion surplus. It's not that we don't have the money. Why might they oppose free community college? So why do you think that those in positions of power might want to do all of these things? You can just put it in the chat. To stay in control, yes. Yes, majority African-American families and provide lesson empowerment, yes. Greed, yes, all of these things, y'all. All right, so if we're going to address the issues in early childhood, we have to alter the power dynamics that maintain the current barriers and structures. We have to focus on the components and structures that perpetuate the inequities. And then we have to shift the circumstances that are holding these problems in place, which means we have to address the root causes of these social problems, which is why I focus so much on the history of power in the United States and white supremacy and all of those things, because that is what is holding, that is the root cause for what is holding these social problems in place. And so when we're thinking about empowerment, it's just the process of becoming stronger and more confident, especially in controlling one's life and claiming one's rights. So there are different types of empowerment, which I'm going to talk about. So the first one is social power. This is just your belief that you can make a difference in society. It helps people find their voices, to speak out against negative or toxic aspects of society. You believe in the power of your voice to change your society, and actually seeing others like you speaking out can be empowering as well. So this is really important for you guys, because you're all here today because you already believe you have social power, right? But I think what you can do is model for others your social power, so that others who can see you speaking out, which can then, inspire them to also see that they have power to control things in society. We also have this educational power. We have to become knowledgeable about particular topics and issues. We have to understand the barriers to change, which is why I talked about, all of the history of the United States, and identify the root causes of societal problems. So as you become, to increase your educational power, I really encourage you to look at your area, like your county, your community, look at the issues, right? So say it's access to education or access to childcare in your community. Really look and research the statistics, because that's a huge important thing. Legislators like to see statistics. So it's really important that you research the issues, the topics, so that you can have this really cohesive and clear argument for why we need to increase access to childcare. So then we have political power. This is just our ability to gain allies and build coalitions. And the one project that we're doing right now is we're really focusing on community organizing, which is incredibly important for building more political power. Yes, Rochelle, we need to teach children that are worthy to be heard. Social emotional development empowers children, right? And so what we need to do is we have to gain allies and build coalitions, and that can be done through community organizing, which is basically bringing along more people to advocate for change. And we have to increase the diversity of voices who advocate for change, which is one thing that has been talked about in this session. And the next one is really hard, but it's extremely important, that we have to build bridges with individuals who have differing opinions. And we have to get this a place where there's a difference between agreement and understanding, right? We all don't have to agree, but we have to understand where the other person is coming from. A lot of equity work is shared humanity work. And so we have to be able to build bridges with individuals. That's why relationships are so incredibly important. When we have relationships with other people, we're better able to, influence their opinions and their understandings, agree to disagree, right? And then we have this psychological power. Create the third space. Understand the impact of various biases on social norms, on your behavior and the behaviors of others. So understanding, again, this is shared humanity work, understanding that those in positions of power are influenced by societal norms and biases and all of those different kinds of things. we have to understand psychological empowerment because it helps us break down systemic biases, including systemic racism in the United States. And so we have to listen to people from different races or socioeconomic groups to build empathy and awareness. Again, the importance of relationships. When we have authentic relationship with other people, we're more likely to bring them along. And we have to talk to other people who are going through the same things as you are. So again, building those coalitions, finding your allies, increasing the ability the ability of others to see their social power within society. And then we have this personal power, right? This ability to influence people or events. And it comes from our own individual characteristics rather than from authority. So, it's really important that you identify your own strengths related to advocacy. Maybe you're really good at determining, building relationships. Maybe you're really good at finding the data and all of those kinds of things. That's why it's important to have this coalition, because everybody brings their own strengths. And so you can build off each other's strengths and really build that power for change. And someone with a strong personal power is focused on their self-efficacy, that they are effective, and their ability to cooperate with others. Again, cooperation and collaboration is critical to building coalition. And so it's important to understand that nobody has all the answers, that none of us have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. That's why, you guys are more experts on the early childhood system than I am, because you're in it, right? And so it's important for us to shape, really deconstruct power in our coalitions so that we are all working together towards a common cause. And so when we're looking at building that power, right, the first principle is we have to understand, respect, and generate power. So we have to recognize, hold on a second. I gotta respond to this. Yes, we have to recognize that we all have power. Every one of us has power in the society. And I think there are too many people right now who feel discouraged and powerless and overwhelmed by what's happening in society. But again, like I said at the beginning, we are in a 4-alarm fire right now. Rights and privileges of traditionally marginalized groups are being chipped away, and they're going to be continued to chip away if we don't come together to generate our personal power. We have to become even more bold about our right to be righteously and rightfully powerful in our hearts, our minds, and our bodies. We have to shape and become our government, and we have to use power well and thoughtfully in service of each and all of us. So it's like, again, it's not about, and I try to communicate to my boys, right, is that all of us have power. We have to be thoughtful about how we use it in service to each and all of us, not just for ourselves. The next one is to know yourself, know your strengths, your weaknesses, your desire for growth. Again, growth is a huge part, personal growth is a huge part of equity work. Admit that white supremacy and racism affect all of us. None of us are immune within our society to the effects of racism and white supremacy. We've all been traumatized and absorbed messages about who matters and who doesn't in our society. We have to see and claim our power, our wisdom, our bravery, our intuitive and emotional and intellectual gifts. And again, we have to be vulnerable and authentic, sharing our personal stories. The power of personal narratives is incredibly important. And because this work is so difficult, and I'm telling you, it's really, really exhausting and difficult, we have to have a sense of humor. We have to be able to laugh at ourselves at certain situations, or we're going to get burnt out real fast, because the issues that we are trying to change are so immense and deep within our society. Then the third principle is we have to think and act collectively. So find allies in your community, people who want to work and advocate for change. Can you guys hear me? Okay. And we have to create a shared language around the pressing issues in early childhood. So we really have to work together, find our allies, create a shared language, pick the issues that you want to focus on collectively, right? So maybe it's access to affordable housing, which is an early childhood issue. Maybe it's access to prenatal care, which is an early childhood issue. We often think that it's not, but all of these things play into how children come into early childhood programs. Again, we have to build bridges between individuals with differing opinions. We have to have humility that none of us have all the answers so that we can share power with one another and build off each other's strengths. And again, invest in relationships, not only with your allies, but also with individuals who have differing opinions. Shared language should only be what's best for our children. Nothing political should play into that. Thank you.